My parents demanded I give my $37,000 business fund to my jobless brother. So I chose to leave and save my future instead. My older brother, Matt, is the golden child. He's 24 and has pretty much coasted through life so far. He doesn't really work and hasn't had a job in months. Anytime he's been employed, it always ends because he either quits or gets fired for some stupid reason. He's that guy who somehow gets away with doing absolutely nothing and still gets whatever he wants from my parents. Meanwhile, I'm 19, busting my ass working part-time jobs while going to school, and somehow, I'm the one who's supposed to have it all together. I've been saving for a long time now. Ever since I was 15, I've been working wherever I could. Anything from stocking shelves at the grocery store to delivering food, just to build up some money for my own future. I didn't want to go the normal route of working a boring 9-to-5 job. I've had this idea for a business, something I've been thinking about for years. I won't get into all the details because it doesn't really matter to the story, but I was proud of myself. I managed to save up $37,000 on my own. No handouts, no help from my parents, just me working every chance I got. That's the money I plan to use to start this business. You'd think my parents would be proud of me, right? Like, wow, our kid is really putting in the work and being responsible. But no. Instead, they act like that money is just sitting there, waiting to be spent on whatever problem Matt has this week. About a month ago, Matt decided he needed a new apartment. He's been living in this small place that's honestly fine for someone who doesn't have a job and isn't paying rent on time half the time. But no, apparently, it wasn't good enough for him anymore. He found this fancy new apartment in one of the nicest parts of town, and of course, he didn't have the money for the deposit. Shocker. When I first heard about it, I wasn't worried. It wasn't like I thought they were going to ask me to pay for it. I mean, why would they? Matt's a grown man, right? He can figure out how to make things work on his own. But then, one night, my parents sat me down. I knew something was up because they never sit me down for anything, unless they're about to throw some heavy stuff my way. I thought maybe they were going to tell me they were proud of me for all the saving I'd done, or maybe they wanted to talk about how my business idea was going. That would have been nice. But no. They blindsided me. "We need to talk about Matt," my mom started, giving me that serious look she only pulls out when she's about to guilt-trip someone. "He found an apartment, but he's short on the deposit." I kind of just sat there waiting for her to continue, like, what did that have to do with me? And then she said it. "We think it would be a good idea if you gave Matt your savings. He really needs this place, and it's just sitting in your account anyway." I blinked at her, sure I hadn't heard that right. I mean, no way were they serious. My savings, the $37,000 I'd spent years working for Matt, for an apartment? I couldn't even respond at first. It was like I'd stepped into an alternate reality where people actually thought that was a reasonable request. "Wait, what?" was all I managed to get out. "Matt's been going through a rough time," my dad chimed in, trying to sound like the voice of reason. "We just think, as a family, you should help him out. It's not like you need that money right now." I could feel my face heating up. I still couldn't believe they were actually saying this to me. "So, you want me to give him my savings? The money I've been saving for my business?" I asked. "Yes," my mom said, like it was the most obvious thing in the world. "Your family, you should be willing to help." I sat there, my mind racing. It wasn't just that they were asking me to give up my savings. It was the way they were doing it. Like I didn't have a choice, like it was expected of me. And I should just roll over and do it because Matt needed it more. And then my dad dropped the real bomb. "If you're not willing to help your brother, then maybe you should start looking for another place to live." I swear my heart stopped for a second. They were actually threatening to kick me out over Matt's apartment, over money that I'd earned. I was in shock. Like, how could they even think that was okay? I worked for every cent of that $37,000. I had plans. I wasn't just sitting on it for fun. It was supposed to be the start of my future, my way out of being dependent on anyone else. They must have noticed how quiet I was because my mom started up again, saying something about how family comes first, and Matt would do the same for you. Spoiler alert, Matt has never done anything for me, ever. He's never even offered to help out around the house, let alone financially. But somehow, I'm supposed to just hand over my future for him. I told them I needed some time to think about it, which honestly was just my way of stalling. There was no way in hell I was going to give them that money, but I didn't know what to do either. They were threatening to kick me out, and I didn't have a backup plan. I didn't have enough to live on my own yet, not while trying to start a business at the same time. So, I spent the next couple of days trying to figure things out. The whole time, my parents kept acting like I was some villain for not immediately handing over my savings. My dad started making little passive-aggressive comments like, "Must be nice to have money and not worry about your family," while my mom gave me the cold shoulder. And Matt? He didn't say a word to me, probably didn't care as long as he got his apartment. After that night, things just kept getting worse. I had barely finished processing the whole "give us your $37,000 for Matt's apartment" thing. And now the pressure was on me constantly. It was like living in a pressure cooker that was about to blow up at any second. Every single day, my parents would find some way to bring it up. My mom would randomly start a conversation about how Matt was stressed and needed support, and how I should really think about stepping up for the family. Like, how many ways can you guilt trip someone in one conversation? Apparently, my mom was set on finding out. My dad, though, he took a different route. He wasn't as direct as my mom. Instead, he'd throw these comments at me whenever we were in the same room. Stuff like, "You're lucky you don't have real responsibilities yet," or "Family sacrifices are what keep us strong." Yeah, okay, Dad. Real subtle. I don't know why they thought this would work. If anything, it just made me dig in even more. But it was getting harder to deal with. I mean, every time I walked into the kitchen, I felt like I was being ambushed. They'd be sitting there, waiting for me to say something, like I'd magically change my mind after hearing their guilt trips for the 100th time. But the real kicker was Matt himself. He didn't say much at all, but that's what pissed me off the most. It's like he didn't care where the money came from as long as he got his apartment. He'd just sit there in the living room, watching TV or scrolling through his phone, completely oblivious to the fact that I was being bombarded with this nonsense. There were times I wanted to snap at him, just yell, "Dude, why don't you try getting a job or working for something for once in your life?" But I didn't. I don't know why. Maybe I was holding out hope that they'd all come to their senses. Spoiler, they didn't. After a few days of this, I decided I needed some space. I didn't have the money to move out, thanks to saving for my business, not rent. But I could at least try to get away from the constant pressure for a bit. So I started staying late at school, using the library as an escape. It was better than being at home and having to deal with my parents and their never-ending campaign to squeeze my savings out of me. But even that didn't work for long. One afternoon, I came home late, thinking I'd avoided the daily guilt-tripping session. But as soon as I walked through the door, my mom was waiting for me in the kitchen. It was like she'd been preparing for this conversation all day. She didn't waste any time. "We need to talk," she said, standing there with her arms crossed like I was some rebellious teenager sneaking in past curfew. "About what?" I asked, knowing exactly what was coming but hoping she'd at least surprise me with something else for once. "You know what this is about," she said, her voice tight with frustration. "Matt's apartment. He needs that money. We've been patient with you, but we can't wait forever." I could feel the heat rising in my face. I was trying so hard not to lose it, but man, was it tough. "Mom, I've told you a million times, I saved that money for my business. I'm not just going to give it away." She sighed, acting like she was the one dealing with unreasonable people. "You're being selfish, you know that? Matt's struggling, and you have the means to help him. If you were in his shoes, we'd expect him to help you." That was the line that set me off. The idea that Matt would ever help me if the situation were reversed was just laughable. "Matt wouldn't lift a finger for me, and you know it," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "He hasn't even asked me for the money. He's just sitting there, waiting for you to hand it to him on a silver platter." My mom's face tightened, like she didn't want to admit I was right, but deep down she knew it. "He's your brother," she said, her voice quieter now. "Family helps each other." I shook my head. Family helps each other, but it goes both ways. I'm not here to bail him out every time he screws up. I've worked too hard for that money. At that point, my dad had joined the conversation, walking into the kitchen with this look on his face like he was about to give some grand speech that would solve everything. "Your mom's right," he said, crossing his arms. "This isn't just about money. It's about family. You don't understand yet because you're young, but you'll see one day that sometimes you have to make sacrifices for the people you love." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. They were acting like I was some heartless monster for not wanting to throw away years of hard work so my brother could live in a nicer place. "And what about me?" I shot back. "Doesn't my future matter at all? I'm not just sitting on this money for fun. I saved it for a reason, for my business. You can always save more money later, my dad said, shrugging like it was no big deal. But Matt needs this apartment now. It was like talking to a brick wall. No matter what I said, they kept coming back to the same point. Matt needed the money, so I should just give it up. It didn't matter what I had planned for it, or how hard I'd worked to save it. None of that mattered to them. The worst part was, they didn't even seem to care about Matt's responsibility in all of this. They weren't pushing him to find a job or figure out how to make things work on his own. Nope. It was all on me to fix his problems, just like it had been my whole life. Anytime Matt screwed up, it was always me who had to make up for it. I knew deep down that no amount of arguing was going to change their minds. They'd made up their minds a long time ago, probably before they even sat me down that first night. The pressure wasn't going to stop until I either gave them what they wanted or left. And honestly, at that point, leaving was starting to look like my only option. But it wasn't that simple. I didn't have a backup plan. I didn't have enough money to cover rent and keep my savings intact. My friends didn't exactly have spare rooms lying around. I felt trapped. No matter what I chose, I was going to lose something. Either I gave them the money and sacrificed my future, or I stood my ground and risked getting kicked out with nowhere to go. And the worst part? My parents didn't seem to care. They didn't care about what was fair, or about my future. All they cared about was making sure Matt was taken care of. It didn't matter what that cost me. So yeah, things were looking pretty bleak. But I wasn't ready to give up yet. After a week of constant pressure from my parents, I had hit my limit. I couldn't take the guilt-tripping, the passive-aggressive comments, and the feeling that, no matter what I did, I was the bad guy. It was like the more I tried to reason with them, the more they dug their heels in. But the worst part wasn't even what they were saying. It was the fact that they truly believed Matt was entitled to my money, like it was his birthright or something, like he had some automatic claim to it just because he needed an apartment. I was exhausted. I spent my days either hiding out at school or working part-time, anything to avoid going home and dealing with the mess that was waiting for me. But no matter how much I tried to avoid them, it wasn't like I could disappear completely. They always managed to corner me at some point, and the conversation would always loop back to the same thing, how I needed to step up for Matt. So one evening I decided I was done. I wasn't going to let them keep pushing me around. I wasn't giving Matt my savings, and if that meant I had to leave, then so be it. I'd rather be out on the street than give up what I'd worked so hard for. I knew it wasn't going to be easy, but I couldn't keep living like this. I had to take a stand. When I got home that night, my parents were waiting for me in the living room. They had that look on their faces, like they'd been planning this conversation all day. I could feel the tension in the air before I even sat down. "Have you made a decision yet?" my dad asked, not even bothering with small talk. I knew what he was really asking. Decision was just a nice way of saying, "Have you given in yet?" "Yeah, I've made my decision," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. "I'm not giving Matt my savings." The silence that followed was thick, like the air had been sucked out of the room. My dad stared at me, his jaw tight, while my mom looked like she was about to cry. "Are you serious?" My mom finally said, her voice shaking. "After everything we've done for you, this is how you repay us?" Here we go again, the guilt-tripping Olympics. "Mom, I've told you 1,000 times that money is for my business. I've been saving it for years. I'm not just going to hand it over because Matt doesn't feel like working." My dad leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. "It's not about Matt not working. It's about family, and right now, your brother needs help. We've given you everything, and all we're asking for is this one thing." I almost laughed. "One thing? You're asking me to give up everything I've saved?" "It's not a small favor. You're asking me to throw away my future so Matt can get an apartment he hasn't worked for. Matt has been going through a tough time," my mom said, wiping at her eyes. "He needs this. You have no idea what it's like to struggle the way he has." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Mom, are you serious? I've been working my ass off since I was 15, saving every cent for this business. You're acting like I haven't been struggling too. We've helped you out plenty," my dad cut in. "We gave you a roof over your head. We supported you through school." "Supported me?" I snapped. "I've been paying for everything myself. You guys haven't given me a dime for school, and you know it." I could feel the anger building in my chest. I wasn't usually the type to yell or get worked up, but I was just so tired of this. Every time I tried to defend myself, they twisted it into something else, like I was the one being unreasonable. "Look, I'm not doing this," I said, standing up. "If you want to kick me out because I won't give Matt my savings, then fine, I'll leave. But I'm not going to give him a single cent." My mom let out this gasp, like I just announced I was disowning the family or something. "You'd really leave your family over money?" "No, Mom, you're the ones kicking me out," I shot back. "You're the ones making this all about money, not me." For a moment, I thought maybe they'd finally get it. Maybe they'd realize how messed up this whole situation was and back off. But no. My dad stood up, crossing his arms like he was trying to show me he was serious. "If you're not willing to help your brother," he said, "then you're not welcome in this house." There it was, the ultimatum. I felt a weird mix of anger and relief. Angry that they'd actually go through with this, but relieved that at least the waiting was over. Now I knew exactly where I stood. "Fine," I said, my voice flat. "I'll be out by the end of the week." My mom burst into tears, and my dad just stood there, looking like he'd won some kind of moral victory. Matt, of course, wasn't even home to witness any of this. Probably out with friends or doing whatever he did with his days. I turned and walked up to my room, my head spinning. I knew I was doing the right thing, but that didn't make it any less terrifying. I didn't have a solid plan, and I wasn't sure where I was going to go, but I wasn't about to let them bully me into giving up my savings. That money was my future, and I wasn't going to let them take it away from me just because Matt was too lazy to get his life together. The next few days were tense. My parents barely spoke to me, and when they did, it was just to throw more guilt my way. My mom would sit at the kitchen table, sniffling and wiping her eyes, like I'd broken her heart. My dad would mutter under his breath about how ungrateful I was, and how I was tearing the family apart. But I stayed firm. I quietly started packing my stuff, moving things to a friend's place bit by bit. I didn't want to make a big scene about it, but I knew I had to be ready for when the time came to leave. Part of me still hoped that maybe, just maybe, they'd come to their senses. Maybe they'd realize that what they were asking wasn't fair. But every day that passed, it became clearer that they weren't going to budge. They'd chosen Matt over me, and there was no changing their minds. The night before I was supposed to leave, my mom tried one last time to guilt me into staying. She came up to my room, her eyes red from crying, and sat down on the edge of my bed. "Please don't do this," she said softly. "You don't have to leave. We can work something out." I shook my head. "Mom, I'm not giving Matt my savings. That's the only way I'm staying, right?" She didn't say anything for a long time, just sat there staring at the floor. Finally, she got up and walked out without another word. And that was it. The next day, I packed the last of my things and left. Leaving the house felt unreal, like I was stepping out of one life and into another. I had my backpack slung over one shoulder, my duffel bag in hand, and my heart pounding in my chest. My mom didn't say anything as I walked out. She was in the kitchen just staring at the table. My dad was nowhere to be seen. I guess that was their way of showing me they didn't care whether I stayed or left. As soon as I got outside, I felt this weird sense of freedom mixed with a heavy dose of what the hell am I going to do now? I hadn't really thought past leaving the house. I had some of my stuff stashed at a friend's place, and I was planning on crashing there for a while, but that was temporary at best. The reality of it all was hitting me hard. I was basically homeless. I showed up at my buddy's place later that day. He was one of the few people I'd told about what was going on, and luckily, he was cool with me staying on his couch for a bit. We sat down that night, and I told him everything that had gone down, from the moment my parents demanded my savings to the final blow when they basically gave me the boot. "Dude, that's messed up," he said, shaking his head. "I don't even get why they'd expect you to hand over everything like that." I shrugged, still trying to wrap my head around it myself. It's always been like that with Matt, man. He screws up, and somehow it becomes my problem to fix. This time, they just took it to a whole new level. We stayed up talking for hours, mostly about how I was going to handle things from here. He offered to let me stay as long as I needed, but I didn't want to overstay my welcome. I appreciated the offer, but I knew I couldn't live on his couch forever. The next few days were a blur of trying to figure out my next move. I reached out to my school's housing office to see if there were any emergency accommodations, but they didn't have anything available. They gave me some leads on local resources though, which was better than nothing. I started looking for cheap apartments near campus, but most of them were way out of my price range, even with my savings intact. The idea of dipping into my business fund to cover rent was already making me anxious. Meanwhile, my parents, radio silence. Not a single text or call. It was like I didn't exist anymore. I had this little sliver of hope that maybe they'd realize how messed up the situation was and reach out, but nope, nothing. Matt didn't say anything either, which honestly didn't surprise me. He was probably pissed I didn't hand over my savings so he could live in his fancy new place. Typical. I'd been crashing at my friend's place for about a week when things really started to get to me. It wasn't just the uncertainty of where I was going to live, though that was definitely a big part of it. It was the isolation. My parents had cut me off, and I felt like I was floating in limbo, trying to figure out what my life looked like now that I wasn't part of their picture anymore. One night I was scrolling through my phone, debating whether or not to reach out to my parents. I don't know why. I guess part of me still wanted to fix things, even though I knew it wasn't going to happen. But before I could overthink it too much, I got a message from Matt. It was short and to the point. "Hope you're happy, you've ruined everything." I stared at the screen, feeling a mix of anger and disbelief. Ruined everything? How was this on me? He was the one who was trying to take my money, and I was the one who got kicked out for standing up for myself. But in Matt's mind, I was the villain. I didn't bother replying. There was no point. Anything I said would just turn into another fight, and I was done fighting with them. I tossed my phone on the couch and tried to focus on figuring out what to do next. The next day, I decided to meet with a lawyer. I'd been putting it off because I didn't want to escalate things, but after that message from Matt, I wasn't taking any chances. I needed to make sure my savings were protected, and I wanted to know if there was anything else I should be doing to cover myself legally in case things got worse. The lawyer I met with was surprisingly chill. He listened to my story without interrupting and then gave me some solid advice. The good news was, legally, my parents couldn't touch my savings without my consent. The bad news was, they might still try to find some loophole if they were desperate enough. He recommended that I keep all my financial documents secure and start keeping a paper trail of any interactions with my family, just in case. I walked out of that meeting feeling a little more confident. At least I had some legal protection, and now I had a plan in case my parents tried to pull anything shady. But at the same time, the whole thing felt heavier than ever. I wasn't just dealing with a family argument. I was dealing with the possibility that my own parents might try to screw me over legally. It was depressing, to say the least. Over the next couple of weeks, I focused on getting my life back on track. I found a part-time job that paid better than the one I had before, and I started saving every penny I could. I was determined not to touch my business fund unless I absolutely had to. I also kept looking for apartments, and eventually, I got lucky. I found this tiny studio apartment, a little further from campus, but it was cheap and just within my budget. I moved in at the end of the month. It wasn't much, a single room with a tiny kitchen and a bathroom that felt more like a closet, but it was mine, and after everything that had happened, that meant everything. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I had a little control over my life again. Still, things with my family were, well, non-existent. They hadn't tried to contact me again after Matt's message. No apologies, no attempts to patch things up. It was like I'd been erased from their lives. Part of me was hurt by that, but another part of me was relieved. I didn't have to deal with their drama anymore. I was free to focus on my own life, my own goals, without constantly worrying about being dragged into Matt's messes. But even with that freedom, there were still moments when it all felt overwhelming. I'd be lying if I said it didn't get to me. Sometimes there were nights when I'd lie in bed, staring at the ceiling, wondering if I'd made the right choice, wondering if there was a way I could have handled things differently. But every time I thought about giving in, I reminded myself why I'd left in the first place. This was my life, my savings, my future, and no one, not even my family, was going to take that from me. Settling into my new apartment was a weird mix of relief and loneliness. On one hand, I finally had a place of my own, somewhere I didn't have to tiptoe around guilt-tripping parents or deal with Matt's entitled attitude. It was just me, my thoughts, and the small space that I could actually call mine. But on the other hand, it felt off. Like, yeah, I was free, but it wasn't the kind of freedom I thought I'd have at 19. The apartment was tiny, barely big enough for a bed, a desk, and a mini fridge. But it didn't really bother me. I'd made it work with way less before. And I had my savings still locked up, safe, untouched. That was the most important thing. I knew I had a long road ahead of me, but at least I was the one in control now, not them. The first few weeks were all about adjusting. I threw myself into work and school, keeping my head down and focusing on what I needed to do. I even picked up a few extra shifts at my new job to make sure I had enough to cover rent and basic expenses, without dipping into my business savings. It wasn't easy, but it felt good knowing that every penny I made went towards something that was mine. My business dream wasn't dead, not by a long shot. But no matter how much I tried to focus on the future, the past kept creeping back in. It was like this constant nagging feeling in the back of my mind. What if my parents reached out? What if they apologized? What if Matt actually grew up and realized how much of a jerk he'd been? A part of me wanted that closure, even though I knew it wasn't likely. One night I got a random text from an unknown number. At first I thought it was spam, but then I realized it was my dad. He'd changed his number, probably because he didn't want me ignoring him. But the message was clear: we need to talk. It's time to move past this. I stared at the message for what felt like hours, debating whether or not to respond. I hadn't heard from them in weeks, and now, all of a sudden, they wanted to move past everything? Just like that? It didn't sit right with me. I wasn't ready to pretend like everything was fine, especially when they hadn't shown an ounce of remorse for what they'd put me through. So I didn't reply. I wasn't going to be dragged back into their mess just because they decided they were ready to talk. If they couldn't respect me or my boundaries, then I wasn't going to waste any more of my energy on them. A couple of days later I got another text, this time from Matt. His message was way shorter: we need to fix this. Fix what, exactly? There was nothing to fix from my side. He hadn't reached out once since I'd left. No apology, no acknowledgement of how unfair they'd been. He probably just wanted to guilt me into feeling bad, but I was done with that game. I didn't reply to him either. That's when I realized something. I was done waiting for them. I didn't owe them anything. Not a conversation, not forgiveness, and definitely not my savings. For the first time in a long time, I actually felt in control of my life. It wasn't perfect, and there were still moments where I felt like maybe I could have handled things differently, but overall, I knew I'd made the right call. They could try to reach out all they wanted, but unless they were willing to take real responsibility for what happened, I wasn't interested. Life moved on. I threw myself into my business plans whenever I had the time. I started researching more, networking with people online, and trying to get a better sense of how I could actually make this thing work. It was slow progress, but it was progress. At least I wasn't stuck in that toxic cycle with my family anymore, constantly feeling like I was one step away from being betrayed or manipulated. But just when I thought I was finally moving forward, I got hit with another curveball. A few weeks after the texts from my dad and Matt, I got a call from an old family friend. We hadn't talked in ages, so it was weird seeing their name pop up on my phone. When I answered, they sounded hesitant, like they didn't really want to tell me whatever it was they'd called about. "You should know. Your parents have been telling people things about why you left," they said. "It's not good." I felt a pit form in my stomach. "What do you mean?" I asked, bracing myself for whatever twisted version of the story my parents were spreading. "They're saying you abandoned the family," they continued, "that you refused to help Matt when he was struggling, and that you left because you didn't want to be part of the family anymore. They're making it sound like you just up and ditched them for no reason." Of course. Classic. They couldn't accept that they'd driven me away with their ridiculous demands, so they had to make it look like I was the villain. It pissed me off, but at the same time, it wasn't really surprising. My parents had always been good at twisting the narrative to make themselves look like the victims. I thanked the family friend for the heads up and hung up, trying not to let it get to me too much. I knew the truth, and I had the receipts to back it up. If they wanted to spread lies about me, that was on them, but I wasn't going to let it derail the progress I'd made since leaving. After that, I blocked their numbers for good. I didn't need the drama in my life anymore. The whole situation with my parents had taught me a lot about boundaries, and how important it was to protect myself from people who didn't respect them. No matter how much they tried to twist things or guilt-trip me, I wasn't going back to that place where I felt powerless. And honestly, since cutting them off, things started getting better. I found my rhythm with work and school, balancing my job and my business plans. I even started hanging out more with friends and letting myself enjoy life without constantly stressing about what was happening at home. It wasn't perfect. There were still moments where I felt that tug of wanting things to be different, where I wished my family wasn't so messed up, but I was learning to accept that I couldn't change them, and I couldn't fix the situation by giving in or trying to make them see my side. I had to let go of the hope that they'd suddenly turn around and apologize. I was building something for myself now, something that was mine, my business, my future, my life. And even if it wasn't always easy, it felt damn good to know that I was doing it on my own terms. So yeah, I wasn't looking back. They could try to guilt me all they wanted, but I was done being the guy who gave up everything just to keep the peace. I was moving forward, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was actually in control of my own life.